Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter films gave us an entire universe of magic, but not everything J.K. Rowling envisioned made it to the screen. Many scenes were cut or altered, and with them disappeared important details that could have changed how we perceived the story. Today, we'll look into the episodes that remained behind the scenes and try to answer questions that have troubled fans for years. Number 1. The Piggy Tale. Remember the moment in Philosopher's Stone when Hagrid bursts into the Dursleys' house and in a fit of anger gives Dudley a pig's tail? The scene looks like a joke, but think about it. The boy actually went through a traumatic experience. What happened to him afterward? The film stays silent. Rowling's book, however, gives us the details. Harry lived with the Dursleys for an entire month before starting school, and Uncle Vernon had to take his son to a regular Muggle hospital to have the tail surgically removed. "We'll have to take Dudley to the hospital," growled Uncle Vernon. "He'll have to have that ruddy tail removed before he goes to school." Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So yes, Dudley was saved, but the very fact that magic left such a strange mark on his life vanished without a trace in the movie. Number 2. Who Am I? Gilderoy Lockhart is one of the brightest, yet most tragic characters in the series. In Chamber of Secrets, he loses his memory and the viewer assumes his story ends there. But the books give us more. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry and his friends visit Arthur Weasley in St. Mungo's Hospital. And it is there that they accidentally encounter their former professor. Through the little window in the door, pressing his nose against the glass, peered a curly-haired blonde man with bright blue eyes and a vacant smile. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Lockhart has lost himself. He is learning to write again and eagerly hands out autographs, not realizing who he used to be. It's a sad reminder that fame and vanity are fleeting. Interestingly, the Order of the Phoenix film originally had scenes planned in the hospital, but they were cut. Only a small detail remained in Chamber of Secrets. After the credits, the shop window of Flourish and Blots displays Lockhart's new book, Who Am I?, with him pictured in a straitjacket. Number 3. The Invisible Army. In Rowling's books, another Hogwarts secret is revealed. All the luxury and comfort of the school rests on the labor of hundreds of house elves. They prepare the feasts, clean the castle, and wash the clothes. It's essentially slavery, even if voluntary. This is what shocked Hermione. She founded SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. Harry and Ron reluctantly joined, while Hermione secretly left knitted clothes around the castle, hoping to trick elves into freeing themselves. 100 little elves lined the kitchen walls, bowing and curtsying as Dobby led Harry past them. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This storyline was cut completely. In the films, we only see Dobby and Kreacher, but beyond those two, the fate of the elves remains invisible. Number 4. The Half-Blood Prince. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry receives a mysterious potions textbook filled with valuable tips and spells. Thanks to it, he suddenly becomes the best student in class, and his secret weapon is the spell Sectum Sempra. At the end of the film, Snape admits he is the Half-Blood Prince. But why that name? The movie gives no answer. The books explain everything. Severus's mother was Eileen Prince, a witch, and his father was a Muggle named Tobias Snape. By combining his mother's surname with his half-blood status, Severus created a nickname that reflected both the pride and the pain of his life. Eileen Prince married a man called Tobias Snape. So in a way I was right. Snape might have been proud to call himself Half-Prince. Hermione, Harry Potter, and the Half-Blood Prince. Thus behind that dry line in the film lies an entire story about the roots and inner world of one of the saga's most complex characters. Number 5. Farewell to Peeves. Peeves was never just comic chaos. In the books, he turned the corridors of Hogwarts into his playground, pelting students with chalk, singing rude songs about teachers, and even chasing Dolores Umbridge from the castle. Rowling described him swooping after her, whacking her alternately on the head with a sock full of chalk and a cane. No ghost or spirit dared defy authority like Peeves, and that defiance gave Hogwarts its mischievous soul. He was the voice of rebellion, showing that magic was not only about rules, but also about laughter and resistance. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Peeves became more than a prankster. He fought against Voldemort's forces in his own wild way, dropping weapons on Death Eaters and cheering the defenders. Rowling wrote, Peeves was bounding along the corridor, knocking over suits of armor and singing, "We did it! We bashed them! We Potters the one!" That final song was not just a jest. It was victory in the language of Hogwarts itself. The films erased him completely, but in the books, Peeves is proof that even chaos can fight for the right side. Number 6. Neville's Pain and Truth. Neville Longbottom's clumsy image in the films hides a grief that shaped his courage. His parents, Alice and Frank, were Aurors who fought bravely against Voldemort. But after his fall, they were captured by Bellatrix Lestrange and tortured with the Cruciatus Curse until their minds shattered. They lived, but as shadows of themselves, forever trapped in St. Mungo's hospital. Rowling never lets us forget this truth. In the Order of the Phoenix, Harry, Ron, and Hermione follow Mrs. Weasley to the hospital and stumble upon Neville with his grandmother. His mother, confused and broken, presses a sweet wrapper into Neville's hand. He doesn't throw it away. He holds it as if it were treasure. "Very well," says Augusta Longbottom stiffly, but the reader sees the boy's silent devotion. That single moment tells us more about Neville than all the pratfalls the films ever showed. This is why Neville could stand before Voldemort in the final battle and draw the sword of Gryffindor. His bravery was not born in a single instant of glory. It was born from years of carrying shame, grief, and the desperate need to honor parents who could no longer recognize him. His pain forged him. Without that knowledge, the Neville of the films seems transformed overnight, but the Neville of the books had been preparing for that moment all his life. Number 7. The Secret of Ariana Dumbledore. Ariana Dumbledore was the shadow that followed Albus all his life. As a child, she was attacked by Muggle boys who saw her doing magic. The assault left her broken, her powers erupting uncontrollably. Their father, Percival, struck back in fury and was sent to Azkaban. Their mother, Kendra, hid Ariana from the world, but the burden of secrecy weighed on the whole family. In the Deathly Hallows, Aberforth confesses bitterly, "She couldn't control it, she was dangerous, but she was my sister, and I loved her." The tragedy was not only Ariana's, but the Dumbledores as a whole. The breaking point came when Albus, still young and ambitious, fell under the spell of Gellert Grindelwald's vision. Their plans for a new order collapsed in violence. Aberforth confronted them, and a three-way duel erupted in the Dumbledore home. Spells flew, walls cracked, and when the smoke cleared, Ariana lay dead. No one knew whose curse had struck her. "It might have been mine," Albus admitted. "It might have been Aberforth's. It might have been Grindelwald's." The uncertainty ate away at him, turning his brilliance into caution and his thirst for power into fear of himself. Films skipped this story almost entirely, leaving Dumbledore as a wise, mysterious mentor. But the books gave him scars. His guilt over Ariana explained why he never sought the title of minister, why he hesitated to face Grindelwald for decades, and why he placed so much weight on Harry's choices. Albus Dumbledore was not simply the great headmaster, he was a man haunted by a sister's death, always carrying the question of whose spell ended her life. Number 8. Hermione's First Love. Hermione's first brush with romance was not with Ron, it was with Victor Krum, the world-famous Bulgarian seeker who stunned everyone at the Triwizard Tournament. He was older, admired by thousands, yet he turned his attention to the quiet, bookish girl who often spent more time in the library than on the dance floor. At the Yule Ball, she descended the staircase transformed, and even Harry admitted he barely recognized her. Rowling wrote, "It was Hermione, but she didn't look like Hermione at all." For Crumb, she was not just another girl, she was someone worth crossing borders for. Their relationship was more than a single evening. Crumb invited Hermione to visit him in Bulgaria, and she kept in touch with him through letters. In The Goblet of Fire, Rita Skeeter even twisted this into a scandal, suggesting Hermione was toying with both Harry Potter and Victor Crumb. But the truth was simple. Hermione was experiencing what it meant to be noticed, desired, and even admired by someone extraordinary. It gave her a new kind of confidence, one that no textbook could provide. For Ron, however, the situation was unbearable. He could not hide his jealousy. When he confronted her after the Yule Ball, Hermione's anger burst out. "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." Her words cut deep because they revealed the heart of her frustration. She wanted Ron to see her not just as a friend, but as a girl whose feelings mattered. Victor's presence forced that tension to the surface, and it would shape the future of their relationship. The films reduced this storyline to a comedic subplot, showing Ron sulking and Hermione briefly radiant at the ball. Yet the books offered a fuller picture. Victor Crumb was not simply a passing crush, he was the mirror that showed Hermione her own worth. He was also the spark that revealed Ron's true feelings. Without Crumb, their love story would have unfolded very differently. Number 9, The Fate of Winky. Winky's story begins in the service of the Crouch family. She was devoted to Bartemius Crouch Sr., obeying without question, even when ordered to guard his disgraced son. When the truth of Barty Crouch Jr.'s escape was revealed, her master did the unthinkable. He gave her clothes. In the world of house elves, freedom is not a gift but a curse if it comes against their will. Winky cried. Winky is a good house elf. Winky did what she was told. The Goblet of Fire. It was the beginning of her downfall. Thrown out of the only life she knew, Winky sought refuge in the kitchens of Hogwarts, but shame haunted her. She refused to accept her new status, clutching at her old identity as a servant. Unlike Dobby, who embraced freedom with joy, Winky spiraled into despair. Rowling described her sitting apart from the other elves, her eyes swimming in tears and a butterbeer clutched in her tiny hands. What looked like child's play for humans was, for her, slow ruin. Hermione saw Winky as the perfect cause for her society for the promotion of elfish welfare. She knitted hats and socks, hoping to trick Winky into accepting freedom proudly. But Winky rejected them, pushing the clothes away with trembling hands. "Winky doesn't want freedom. Winky wants to work," she sobbed. This contrast between Dobby's happiness and Winky's misery shows how deep the chains of magical servitude ran. It was not only physical but emotional, a prison of loyalty and identity. The films erased her, and with her they erased one of Rowling's darkest commentaries. Through Winky, the books explored trauma, addiction, and the cruel weight of tradition. She was not comic relief. She was tragedy in miniature, hidden in the kitchens of a castle where children ate feasts without ever thinking who cooked them. Her absence in the movies left a silence where a painful truth was meant to echo. Number 10. The Secret Slytherin Club. Slytherin House was never meant to be a nest of villains, though the films suggest otherwise. In the books, small circles of Slytherin students gather in the common room, whispering under the green glow of the lake, sharing spells and stories that never reach the rest of the school. They are not Death Eaters in training, they are teenagers, curious and ambitious, who see knowledge as power. Rowling hints at this in The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry slips into the common room under Polyjuice Potion and hears Draco surrounded by his housemates. They listen, they question, they plot. It is a club of minds as much as a group of friends. These circles gave Slytherin its hidden strength. Not every student admired Voldemort. Blaise Zabini, for example, openly mocked others for blindly following leaders. His disdain shows a different face of Slytherin, pride, yes, but also independence. Even Pansy Parkinson, often shown as shallow, formed her own clique, where gossip was a weapon and loyalty was currency. These groups, though never called clubs, functioned as training grounds for leadership. They were mirrors of Dumbledore's army, built not on rebellion, but on quiet ambition. The books remind us that choice, not birth, defines a wizard. Horace Slughorn proves it. His famous Slug Club gathered students he saw as talented or connected, and many of them were Slytherins. They practiced charms, exchanged secrets, and forged alliances. In The Half-Blood Prince, Slughorn tells Harry, "You will be a leader of your generation, I'm sure of it." That same spirit thrived among his Slytherin favourites, who pursued success with the same determination Harry's friends fought for justice. By the Battle of Hogwarts, these quiet alliances mattered. Not every Slytherin raised a wand for Voldemort. Some slipped away, but others, shaped by their own private bonds, refused to be pawns. The films show Slytherin evacuated as cowards. The books whisper another truth. There were friendships and secret clubs that taught them loyalty of a different kind, the loyalty to each other, not to a dark lord. Number 11. Ron, the chess genius. Ron Weasley was never meant to be just comic relief. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the moment when he takes command of the enchanted chessboard shows a side of him the films barely touch. Ron doesn't stumble into victory. He calculates, he sacrifices, he leads. Rowling makes it clear, that's chess. You've got to make some sacrifices, he shouts, choosing to put himself in danger so Harry and Hermione can advance. It is not luck, it is strategy, and it reveals a boy who can think far ahead when it matters most. The films show Ron as clumsy and insecure, but the books give him depth. In The Order of the Phoenix, when Harry forms Dumbledore's army, it is Ron who masters defensive spells quickly, his movements sharp and precise. His instincts often surprise even Hermione. She admits at one point that Ron's practical thinking works faster than her academic knowledge. He is not a fool fumbling in the dark. He is a tactician, the same boy who once played wizard chess until dawn with his brothers, honing a skill that would one day save lives. Ron's brilliance comes again during their search for Horcruxes. In the Deathly Hallows, when the trio is trapped in the icy lake with the sword of Gryffindor, it is Ron who dives in and pulls Harry free. His timing, his courage, and his ability to act decisively turn disaster into survival. The chessboard foreshadowed this. He sees danger, he makes the move, he accepts the risk. Harry may be the chosen one, Hermione the brightest witch, but Ron is the strategist who can make a split-second choice no one else dares. Rowling leaves little doubt. She wanted readers to see the boy behind the jokes, the loyal friend who hides a sharp mind under his freckled face. The films missed that. They made Ron a sidekick. But the book whispers another truth. Every great hero needs someone who can see the board, anticipate the enemy, and be ready to sacrifice himself if that is the only way forward. That someone was Ron. Number 12. The Marauder's Secret. Under the dim light of the Gryffindor common room, 4 boys once sat huddled together, whispering plans that would shape their years at Hogwarts. They were James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, and to the outside world they appeared as nothing more than mischievous pranksters. Yet beneath the laughter and clever tricks, they carried a secret bond forged in trust, danger, and an act of devotion that would forever tie them together. This secret, the creation of the Marauder's map, is barely touched upon in the films, leaving audiences unaware of the extraordinary story of sacrifice and loyalty that defined Harry Potter's father and his closest friends. The films introduced the Marauder's map as nothing more than a convenient magical tool. Harry receives it from Fred and George Weasley, who use it for their own schemes, but the viewer never learns the map's origin. In the books, however, the tale unfolds with deeper resonance. The The map was not simply a magical object born from idle experimentation, it was the culmination of years of dedication by 4 boys who chose to break the rules of magic itself to help one of their own. The films strip away this history, presenting only the product without honoring the remarkable friendship behind its creation. At the heart of their story lies Remus Lupin, the boy who carried a burden heavier than most could imagine. Bitten by the werewolf Fenrir Greyback as a child, Lupin endured monthly transformations that left him in pain and isolation. Dumbledore, in an act of compassion, arranged for him to attend Hogwarts, yet the secret of his condition threatened to cut him off from the world. James, Sirius, and Peter, however, refused to let their friend suffer alone. It is in this act of defiance against fear and prejudice that their legacy truly begins. They dedicated themselves to mastering one of the most advanced forms of magic, becoming animagi. As Lupin later confesses in Prisoner of Azkaban, they became animagi to keep me company during my transformations. Becoming an animagus was no small feat. The process took years of practice, risk, and ingenuity. In their youth, these boys were far from experts, yet their determination outweighed their fear. Each found an animal form that reflected their spirit. James became a stag, noble and protective, earning him the nickname Prongs. Sirius transformed into a large black dog, fierce and loyal, thus Padfoot. Peter, underestimated by all, managed to turn into a small rat, Wormtail. Together they accompanied Lupin, the Moony of their group, during his painful nights in the Shrieking Shack, lessening his loneliness and shielding him from the violent madness of the wolf. This shared act of courage was more than mischief. It was an unspoken vow that no friend should be left behind. From these nights of danger and solidarity was born their creativity. The Marauders map did not simply appear, it was crafted as an extension of their adventures. Every secret passage, every hidden hallway, every trick of Hogwarts became their domain. Their hours spent wandering the castle in their animal forms allowed them to discover things no ordinary student could. The map became a living memory of their youth, filled with the knowledge they had claimed together. In the book, the map greets its user with the now iconic phrase, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." To the outside world, it was a tool of mischief, but to the Marauders, it was a symbol of their unity, their defiance of loneliness, and their triumph over secrecy. The tragedy is that the films gloss over this rich tapestry of friendship. Without context, viewers cannot grasp the depth of Harry's inheritance. The map is passed to him like a toy, a shortcut for sneaking around. Yet in truth, it was the gift of his father's heart, the silent echo of a bond that had once defined James's life. When Harry first uses the map, the weight of this legacy is invisible on screen. Only in the book do we feel the poignancy, the sense that Harry is unknowingly walking in his father's footsteps, treading the same hidden paths that James once roamed with his friends. The story of the Marauders is also the story of how Hogwarts was more than a school. For James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, the castle became a playground of secrets. They carved their identities into its very stones. Their nicknames, stitched into the map, transformed their friendship into legend. Readers can almost hear their laughter echoing through the corridors at midnight, their whispers filling the shadowed hallways as they plotted their next great escapade. The films rob us of this intimate picture, reducing them to names without weight. Yet in the novels, the Marauders come alive as a brotherhood of flawed but fiercely loyal boys who sought to make their world a little larger, a little more bearable. What makes their story even more powerful is the foreshadowing of their fate. The Marauders map captures a moment in time when they were whole, before betrayal fractured them, before war claimed their innocence. James and Lily Potter were murdered, Sirius was imprisoned, Remus condemned himself to solitude, and Peter became the servant of Voldemort. Yet the map, with its mischief and its magic, holds the memory of when they were still Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, united in purpose. The films deny us this bittersweet truth, instead treating the map as a relic without context, when in fact it was the last joyful creation of friends who would soon be torn apart. Number 13. Petunia's unbearable pain. Petunia Dursley stands in the shadows of the Harry Potter saga as one of its most maligned characters, remembered chiefly for her shrill complaints, pinched expression, and unrelenting disdain for the boy forced upon her household. On screen, she is rendered almost as a caricature, a woman who despises magic so deeply that she nearly spits the word. Yet the truth hidden within the pages of J.K. Rowling's books complicates this picture in a way the films never touched. In the printed story, there is a moment when Petunia Dursley reveals a crack in her armor, a fleeting confession that reframes her bitterness not as mindless cruelty, but as the lasting scar of rejection. The overlooked sentence comes during a heated exchange when she blurts, "You think I don't know what they're capable of?" "I know perfectly well, thank you very much. I was the only one to see Lily off to that school the day she left." And later, with even more revealing words, she admits, "I was the one who heard the news first. That awful boy told her she was a witch. I was the only one who saw her off." Buried inside these lines is the revelation that Petunia herself had written to Dumbledore, pleading to be admitted into Hogwarts, only to be denied. That denied wish is one of the most haunting shadows of the series. Imagine the child Petunia Evans, younger than her brilliant sister Lily, but desperate not to be left behind. She would have watched Lily's first sparks of magic with a mixture of awe and dread, knowing instinctively that something precious was being given to one sibling and withheld from the other. Her words in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone carry a sting when reread in light of later books. When she scolds Harry about his mother, calling her a freak, the venom disguises the heartbreak of someone who once wished to be included in that same world. The films flatten her into a one-dimensional antagonist, never hinting at this layer of tragedy. Yet on the page, she becomes more than a bitter guardian. She is a rejected dreamer. Petunia's pain is sharpened by the context of her relationship with Lily. Lily Evans was radiant, gifted not only with magical talent, but also with kindness and warmth. She represented everything Petunia was not, and this imbalance between the sisters only grew after the fateful letter from Hogwarts arrived. Rowling let slip in Order of the Phoenix that Petunia had begged to go as well, writing to Albus Dumbledore in hopes of being accepted. His gentle rejection, although likely phrased with compassion, became a wound that would fester throughout her life. Petunia's jealousy was not born simply from her sister being special, but from the fact that she herself had reached toward that same light and had been turned away. This knowledge reframes every sneer, every harsh word she utters to Harry as an echo of that first humiliation. Consider the symbolism in Petunia's life choices. She marries Vernon Dursley, a man who embodies everything opposite of the magical world. His obsession with order, predictability, and wealth mirrors her desperate attempt to erase anything that might remind her of Lily. Yet the irony is devastating. The harder she pushes against magic, the more it surrounds her. She raises Harry beneath her roof, the living reminder of the world she was excluded from. Her decision to treat him coldly is not merely cruelty, it is a misguided form of self-defense. Every glance at his eyes, identical to Lily's, forces her to confront the path not taken. The films show her contempt without ever giving the audience this context, stripping her of the humanity Rowling layered into her pages. The cruelty Petunia inflicts upon Harry is undeniable, yet even cruelty often has its roots in pain. One cannot overlook the moment in Order of the Phoenix when the name Dementor silences Vernon's ranting, and Petunia, pale and shaken, admits she knows exactly what they are. "I heard that awful boy telling her about them years ago," she says, referencing Severus Snape. This brief memory anchors her firmly in the magical world's orbit. She is not ignorant. She is a woman who once listened on the margins, piecing together scraps of her sister's life, always close enough to know, but never close enough to belong. It is this half-knowledge, this liminal existence, that fuels her bitterness. There is also the small but potent moment in Deathly Hallows when Petunia almost speaks differently. As Harry prepares to leave Privet Drive for the last time, there is a pause where she looks at him, as if on the edge of saying something meaningful. Rowling describes her lips moving silently, her eyes full of something Harry cannot interpret, before she turns away. Readers have long debated this scene. Was she about to apologize? Was she struggling to express regret? It is perhaps the closest Petunia comes to revealing the truth, that her cruelty was born from envy, not hatred. The films, again, erase this complexity, showing only a stiff exit. Yet in that nearly spoken sentence lies the unbearable truth of her character. She loved her sister in her own way, and her rejection turned that love sour. Petunia's story also resonates with one of the saga's deepest themes, the destructive power of envy. Where Lily thrives, Petunia festers. Where Harry finds belonging at Hogwarts, Petunia clings to walls of denial. The books remind us that envy not only poisons relationships but reshapes identities. The girl who once dreamed of magic becomes the woman who despises it most. This metamorphosis is as tragic as any curse. Petunia is not simply a villain, she is a casualty of desire unmet. The films, in excising this layer, rob viewers of one of the saga's most poignant side stories, the tale of a muggle who wanted nothing more than to belong to the very world she grew to fear. Number 14. The Meeting with Dumbledore at the Station. Under the pale glow of that spectral railway station, the scene in J.K. Rowling's book is unlike anything the films allowed viewers to witness in its full depth. Harry Potter, having walked willingly into death at the hands of Lord Voldemort, awakens in a place that is both familiar and surreal. The whiteness of the King's Cross station, stretching endlessly in every direction, creates a dreamlike canvas upon which the most crucial conversation of his life takes place. This encounter with Albus Dumbledore is not merely a passing vision. It is the ultimate moment of truth, where the threads of sacrifice, destiny, and free will finally converge. In simplifying this for the cinema, the films offered only fragments of the profound weight carried in the original words, leaving readers with a sense that something irreplaceable had been left unsaid. When Harry realizes he is not truly dead, but standing at a kind of crossroads, the description in the book lingers in memory. Rowling paints it with precision. He lay face down, listening to the silence. It was a shock after the noise of the crash to hear nothing at all. That silence is heavy, filled with the resonance of every choice Harry has made up to that point. Soon he perceives the location around him as King's Cross, though immaculately clean, impossibly white, and devoid of people. It is a place between life and death, a symbolic representation that works perfectly in prose, allowing the reader to understand that this is no ordinary station, but rather a stage for revelation. The films, however, compress this into fleeting imagery, stripping away much of the philosophical undertone that Rowling built with patience. The figure Harry meets there is Dumbledore, alive once again within the confines of this liminal space. He is presented as calm, serene, and smiling, just as Harry remembered him in happier days. For readers who had mourned his loss in The Half-Blood Prince, this meeting feels like a reprieve, a reunion beyond the grasp of time. Dumbledore explains to Harry that Voldemort, in attempting to kill him, has instead destroyed the piece of his own soul lodged within Harry. The explanation illuminates years of mystery, binding together threads that began with the very first book. As Dumbledore puts it, "You were the 7th Horcrux, Harry, the Horcrux he never meant to make." This admission is devastating but also clarifying, and it reveals to Harry that his survival is no accident. It is the culmination of choices, sacrifices, and the ancient magic of love. The symbolism of this meeting is staggering. On one level, it is an exposition where Rowling finally lays bare the mechanics of Horcruxes, the reason Harry has been connected to Voldemort for so long, and the strange circumstances of his survival. On another level, it is a meditation on life and death itself. Harry asks if he must go on if he has truly died, and Dumbledore answers with words that echo like a moral compass. "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living and above. All those who live without love." The films offer a trimmed version of this wisdom, but the page captures it in full, reminding readers that love, not power, has always been the real magic that defines Harry's journey. What makes this scene particularly significant is the power of choice. Up until this point, Harry has often felt like a pawn in a game orchestrated by forces greater than himself, prophecies, manipulations by Dumbledore, and the shadow of Voldemort's obsession. Yet here, on this white platform, Dumbledore makes it clear Harry is free. He may choose to board a train and move on to whatever lies beyond, or he may return to the world of the living and finish what must be done. "It is your choice, Harry, your decision," Dumbledore insists. This is not merely a dramatic flourish. It is the essence of Harry's heroism. Unlike Voldemort, who clings desperately to immortality at all costs, Harry embraces the reality of death and chooses life not for himself, but for others. The contrast with Voldemort becomes sharper in this chapter than in any battle. Voldemort fears death so completely that he mutilates his soul to avoid it, creating Horcruxes that bind him to a half-life of constant terror. Harry, standing at the threshold of true death, shows no fear. His willingness to sacrifice himself had already destroyed Voldemort's power over his friends, and now, given the chance to pass on peacefully, he instead resolves to return. It is this moral superiority, this fearless embrace of mortality, that makes Harry stronger than Voldemort ever could be. The films portray Harry's courage in combat, but this moment of spiritual bravery, quietly rendered in the book, is the true climax of his journey. There is also the grotesque image that Rowling places in this scene, the malformed, pitiful creature lying beneath the bench, representing the broken fragment of Voldemort's soul that has been expelled from Harry. It is described as something that looked as though it had once been a small, naked child curled on the ground, its skin raw and rough, its breathing ragged. This horrifying image is not just a piece of exposition, it is a moral lesson, a glimpse of what becomes of a soul corrupted by cruelty and obsession. The films barely touched this imagery, but in the novel it lingers in the reader's imagination, a visual reminder of the cost of Voldemort's choices and the fate that awaits those who seek power without compassion. Number 15, Dudley's Goodbye. Of all the scenes omitted from the films, few sting as much as the quiet farewell between Harry Potter and Dudley Dursley in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. For years, the relationship between the two boys had been framed as nothing more than bitter hostility. The films leaned into this, painting Dudley as a caricature of spoiled cruelty, and Harry as the perpetual victim of his cousin's bullying. But J.K. Rowling's text gave that relationship a different, more layered ending, one that revealed growth, change, and humanity, where viewers of the movies saw only mockery. By choosing not to include this moment, the films stripped away a rare scene of reconciliation, depriving us of the chance to witness how even someone raised in an environment of hatred could, eventually, take a step toward compassion. The book carefully stages this moment during the evacuation of the Dursleys from Privet Drive. As Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley prepare to go into hiding for their own safety, the tone is anxious but subdued. Harry, resigned to parting ways with his relatives for the last time, expects nothing more than indifference, perhaps even a final barb from Vernon or Petunia. Instead, what unfolds is completely unexpected. Dudley, who once sneered at Harry as a freak and took pleasure in his suffering, suddenly steps forward and acknowledges something no reader or character could have predicted. He admits that Harry is not, in his words, a waste of space. It's a small phrase, but in the context of their shared childhood, it lands with the weight of a confession, an apology, and a sign of affection. The narration emphasizes Harry's stunned reaction, showing that he cannot quite believe what he has just heard. Rowling writes, "The general impression was that Dudley was struggling with concepts too difficult for his limited brain, but finally he blurted out, 'I don't think you're a waste of space.' That line cuts through years of bitterness. Dudley, whose worldview had been shaped entirely by Vernon and Petunia's disdain for their nephew, reaches for a truth that had been growing quietly inside him. In the darkest moment of the wizarding world, as Voldemort's forces spread terror, Dudley sees Harry for what he truly is, not the burden his parents always claimed, but a cousin who had value. Harry himself is flawed by the remark. He had grown used to being dismissed, mocked, and ignored in his own home. To suddenly hear gratitude and recognition from Dudley is almost inconceivable. Rowling describes the scene with tender simplicity, noting Harry's astonishment. For the first time in his life, Harry thought Dudley might be wishing him well. It is a thought that lingers for the reader because for all the grand battles and sweeping losses in the saga, this intimate moment between two boys who grew up together feels like its own victory. The brilliance of this passage lies in its quietness. There are no sparks, no magic, no dramatic gestures. Dudley does not suddenly become Harry's friend, nor does he erase the years of cruelty. What he offers instead is a glimpse of growth, a recognition that he cannot stay frozen in childhood meanness forever. Readers understand that Dudley has been forced to think for himself, perhaps for the first time, as he faces the reality of Voldemort's threat. His parents' narratives no longer entirely define him. This makes his words far more powerful than any exaggerated apology could have been. Films, unfortunately, cut this reconciliation. In the cinematic version, the Dursleys leave Privet Drive with no meaningful acknowledgement of Harry. They simply vanish, as though the years of conflict and shared history between Harry and his cousin meant nothing. The absence of the farewell flattens Dudley's character, keeping him locked in the role of an overfed bully. It also deprives Harry of the small, humanizing closure that Rowling clearly wanted him to have before his final battle. Without this moment, the films reduce the Dursleys to a running joke rather than showing the complexity that the books allow. What makes this cut particularly disappointing is how much it says about Rowling's view of redemption. Dudley is not a hero, and he never becomes one, but his parting words suggest that change is possible even for those who seemed irredeemable. In a story so deeply concerned with choice, morality, and the possibility of transformation, this was not a throwaway detail. It was an essential reminder that growth can happen in unexpected corners. Dudley's evolution contrasts with characters like Draco Malfoy, who wrestles with his conscience more visibly, and it mirrors the theme that people are not forever defined by their past actions or their upbringing. Rowling makes this even clearer in the extended version of the scene, available in drafts and interviews. In one version, Dudley awkwardly offers Harry a handshake, which Harry hesitates to accept. The gesture is clumsy, but it reinforces the sincerity of Dudley's words. Rowling herself explained that she wanted to show that Dudley was not a bad boy at heart, and that he was capable of seeing Harry as something more than an unwanted presence. That choice added dimension not only to Dudley, but also to the story's larger theme, that people's hearts can shift, however slightly, when confronted with truth. By cutting the scene, the films also weaken the narrative of Harry's place in the Muggle world. The books remind readers that Harry's life is not only tied to the wizarding battles, but also to the messy, mundane relationships with his only living relatives. The fact that Dudley offers this small kindness makes Harry's journey more complete, bridging the gap between the world that rejected him and the one that embraced him. It shows that he does not leave Privet Drive entirely unloved, that even in the house that denied him affection, a spark of understanding eventually ignited. The missed opportunity is even more evident when considering how the films sometimes went out of their way to expand or alter small scenes. They created moments not found in the books, often for dramatic effect. Yet when faced with this subtle, character-defining moment, they chose silence. What could have been a touching goodbye became a void. For audiences who never read the books, Dudley's parting words remain unknown, and with them the chance to see Harry receive an acknowledgement of his worth from the least likely source. Fans who discovered the difference often express frustration at this omission. For many readers, Dudley's farewell was proof that Rowling's world was not black and white, that even characters cast as antagonists could grow. Without it, the films reinforce a simplistic division between good and bad. Dudley's growth in the book resonates because it reminds readers of their own potential for change, no matter how ingrained their habits may seem. It is not about forgiveness, but about the possibility of seeing another person differently after years of blindness. The power of this scene also lies in what it means for Harry. Throughout the series, Harry wrestles with abandonment, rejection, and a desperate need for belonging. From the cupboard under the stairs to the discovery of his parents' sacrifice, his life is shaped by being unwanted. Dudley's words, however small, puncture that narrative. To be told, "I don't think you're a waste of space," by the boy who once delighted in tormenting him is more than a compliment. It is a validation that even in the darkest corners of his life, he had significance. That recognition, coming from someone who should have been incapable of giving it, must have been profoundly healing. In a story where so many relationships end in tragedy, the farewell between Harry and Dudley stands out precisely because it is not tragic. It is awkward, understated, and human. It does not transform them into friends, nor does it undo the pain of childhood, but it plants a seed of reconciliation. Rowling shows us that even if wounds never fully heal, gestures of kindness matter. It is this quiet humanity that the films missed in favor of spectacle and simplicity. The exclusion of the scene also underscores how adaptations make choices that reshape character arcs. Viewers who never read the books leave with the impression that the Dursleys were static, that they never evolved or reflected. Readers, however, know that Dudley carried away at least one lesson: that Harry was not the useless burden his parents claimed. That difference alters the way we understand the story. With Dudley's words, the Dursleys' departure feels like closure. Without them, it feels like abandonment. Ultimately, the farewell between Harry and Dudley is a reminder of how subtle details shape an entire narrative. The book allowed readers to glimpse compassion where there had once been only cruelty. The films chose to erase it, leaving audiences with an incomplete picture. For those who turn back to the text, however, that single line, "I don't think you're a waste of space," remains unforgettable. It is a quiet revelation, tucked inside a story of epic battles, proof that even in the most unlikely places, humanity finds a way to surface. Number 16, Lavender Brown's story. Of all the supporting characters that surrounded Harry Potter and his friends at Hogwarts, few were treated with such light-heartedness on screen and such darkness on the page as Lavender Brown. In the 6th film, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Lavender's presence is played almost entirely for comic relief. She is the enthusiastic, clingy girlfriend of Ron Weasley, a girl who covers him in kisses, whispers 1-1 in the common room, and sparks the jealousy of Hermione Granger. Yet in the novels, Lavender's arc carries a weight that the films never chose to explore. She is not simply a comedic detour in Ron's love life. She becomes a casualty of war, a young witch who pays the ultimate price during the Battle of Hogwarts, her fate tied forever to the savagery of Fenrir Greyback, the werewolf who prowled the shadows of Voldemort's army. Lavender Brown was first introduced to readers as one of the Gryffindor girls in Harry's year, often seen alongside Parvati Patil. She was part of the background of Hogwarts life, sometimes giggling in the dormitory, sometimes practicing divination with Parvati under Professor Trelawney. Her character was not designed to stand at the centre of the story, but Rowling carefully wove her presence through the books so that she felt like a living student of Hogwarts, not just a name. This made her eventual fate more haunting. Readers had known her since her first sorting, had watched her grow through 6 years of classes and friendships, only to see her fall brutally in the very halls of the school she called home. In Half-Blood Prince, her relationship with Ron brought her more attention than ever before. The novel painted Lavender as young, passionate, and somewhat superficial, a girl who threw herself into romance with the intensity of adolescence. For readers, her romance with Ron was never meant to last, but it highlighted Ron's own insecurities and Hermione's feelings in a way that deepened the trio's dynamics. When Hermione destroyed a flock of canaries in her jealousy, when Harry awkwardly witnessed Lavender's public affection, the story pushed Lavender into the spotlight of school drama. Yet even then, Rowling's writing never suggested Lavender was only a joke. She was a teenager, caught in the whirlwind of love, jealousy, and the desire to feel special. Behind the humour was a real girl with a real heart. The shift from comic romance to grim reality came in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. During the final battle, Lavender took her place among those who resisted Voldemort's forces, joining her friends and teachers in defending Hogwarts. This was no small act. Lavender was not a member of Dumbledore's army in the same central way as Neville, Ginny, or Luna, but when the time came, she fought. Her courage placed her in the line of fire, and it was there that Fenrir Greyback, the most feared werewolf of Voldemort's followers, struck. Rowling described the attack with chilling clarity. She was flung across the room by the werewolf's assault. Her body fell, and she lay motionless. The words that followed confirmed what readers dreaded. Lavender Brown was dead. Fenrir Greyback's presence in the battle made the scene even more terrifying. He was not a fully transformed werewolf at the time, since the attack occurred during a non-full moon, but Rowling emphasized that Greyback enjoyed maiming and killing as much in his human form as in his wolfish one. His obsession was with children, with young victims, and Lavender fit his pattern of cruelty. This detail carried horror far beyond the fleeting glimpse given in the film. In David Yates's cinematic version, Lavender is attacked by Greyback and shown lying injured, but no conclusion is given. The audience is left uncertain whether she lived or died, and the camera quickly moves to other action. The omission stripped her fate of consequence, reducing the attack to another chaotic flash in the storm of battle. The difference matters because Lavender's death was not just one more casualty. It symbolized the cost of Voldemort's war on ordinary students. Her fall was personal to readers who had grown up seeing her in the background of the Gryffindor dormitory. She was not an anonymous fighter like those whose names we never learned. She had laughed in divination class, she had fallen in love, she had quarreled with her friends. She was one of them, and her death reminded readers that the war was not limited to heroes and villains. It consumed the everyday lives of Hogwarts children. In her we saw the tragedy of a schoolgirl cut down by violence she never deserved. Rowling reinforced this sense of tragedy with the context of the battle. The Great Hall was filled with the wounded and the dead, and Lavender's body was carried among others like Colin Creevey and Fred Weasley. Each represented a different angle of loss. Fred, the Joker, fell in laughter's midst. Colin, the boy with a camera, died before he even reached adulthood, and Lavender, who once spent her days fussing about romance and divination charts, was silenced forever by a predator. Their deaths marked the end of innocence, both for Hogwarts and for the readers who had grown with them. The novels did not linger on Lavender's romance with Ron when describing her fate. Instead, they presented her as one more young life extinguished in a war that cared nothing for teenage crushes or common room gossip. This, too, added to the poignancy. She was more than a lovesick schoolgirl. She was part of the tapestry of Hogwarts, and when she fell, the school itself seemed smaller, emptier, robbed of another familiar face. The film's decision to sidestep her confirmed death robbed audiences of this sense of gravity. By not acknowledging her as a casualty, the movie softened the brutality of Greyback and undercut the idea that the battle devoured even the minor characters we had known since the beginning. Quotes from the book illustrate the weight Rowling intended. As described in Deathly Hallows, 2 bodies fell from the balcony overhead and hit the stone floor in front of Harry, Greyback, and a masked Death Eater. The werewolf clambered to his feet and flexed his claws. With a snarl, he plunged towards the prone body of Lavender Brown. This moment was designed to chill. The sight of Greyback, hunched and bloodthirsty, hovering over the broken body of Lavender, was not a passing image. It was a deliberate reminder that the forces of Voldemort reveled in brutality, that they targeted the young and defenseless, and that survival was never guaranteed. For readers who loved the complexity of the books, Lavender's death raised questions about memory and recognition. Would her classmates remember her only as the girl who once called Ron 1-1, or would they see her as a victim of war, deserving of dignity in death? Rowling seemed to push toward the latter, weaving her into the roll call of fallen students. Yet the films cemented her as the butt of a romantic joke, leaving audiences without the closure that the novels provided. For many viewers, she remained nothing more than an irritating girlfriend, and her tragic end was erased. The decision to minimize Lavender's fate in the films reflected a broader tendency of the adaptations, to streamline, to cut subplots, to focus on the golden trio while softening the shadows of secondary stories. But in this case, the omission mattered. Lavender's death humanized the losses of war. It reminded readers that the war did not just claim grand heroes or faceless villains, but girls who once whispered in the dormitory, who once laughed at silly jokes, who once daydreamed about love. In silencing her death, the film stripped away a piece of the war's humanity. The consequences of this choice ripple outward when we consider how the Battle of Hogwarts is remembered. On screen, the battle plays as a spectacle of light and dark, with monumental duels and collapsing walls. But on the page, it was also intimate, filled with glimpses of individuals, each name adding weight to the grief. Lavender Brown's death was part of this. Without it, the film's battle leaned more toward triumph than tragedy. Readers knew better. They knew that even victory was purchased at the cost of Lavender's blood, Fred's laughter, and Colin's dreams. Fenrir Greyback's attack also symbolized the unchecked violence of Voldemort's forces. He was not under the Imperious curse, nor was he acting under orders. He was a predator unleashed by a regime that welcomed his cruelty. By killing Lavender, he marked the degradation of war itself. This was not combat between equals, it was the slaughter of the young by monsters. Rowling did not need to describe the aftermath in detail. The single sentence confirming Lavender's death was enough. Readers understood that the innocence of Hogwarts was gone forever. When we reflect on Lavender Brown's place in the story, we see the full contrast between book and film. In the novels, she evolves from background student to comic romantic to fallen defender. Her arc is a microcosm of Rowling's theme, that war spares no one, not even the seemingly trivial characters. In the films, she is denied that conclusion, trapped forever in the role of comic relief. The absence of her death diminishes the story's weight and cheats her of dignity. She was not just 1-1's girlfriend, she was Lavender Brown, Gryffindor, fighter, and casualty of the last great battle. The silence of the films leaves us with a hollow question. How many viewers ever realized Lavender Brown was meant to die in that battle? How many walked away remembering her as a punchline instead of a victim. That gap between book and screen is where the secret lies. Lavender's true story was not of adolescent infatuation, but of sacrifice, terror, and the cruel randomness of war. The pages of Deathly Hallows preserved her final moment. The films turned away. And in doing so, they erased one more reminder of what war costs, even within the walls of a castle built to protect children. Number 17, The Fate of Lupin and Tonks. The films of Harry Potter sweep past the tragedy of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks with a quiet gesture. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, their deaths are shown only in passing, lifeless bodies resting side by side in the Great Hall as the camera lingers briefly before moving on. The audience receives no explanation, no context, no depth. For those who only know the films, Lupin and Tonks are reduced to names on a long list of casualties. Yet the books unravel something far deeper, something that resonates with the very heart of Harry's story, the painful inheritance of a war that steals parents from their children. Remus Lupin's journey toward marriage with Tonks was never simple. From his very first introduction in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he was marked as a man living in quiet exile, carrying the stigma of being a werewolf. His life was dominated by secrecy, rejection, and a permanent sense of being unworthy. In Half-Blood Prince, his hesitation to accept Tonks's love reflected this deep-rooted fear. He told Harry, "You don't understand. She deserves someone young and whole." His words carry the weight of a man convinced that his condition would only bring misery to anyone who dared love him. This inner conflict made his eventual marriage to Tonks not only a triumph of love over fear, but also one of the most courageous choices of his life. Tonks's devotion to Lupin, however, never wavered. She was introduced in Order of the Phoenix as vibrant, clumsy, and irrepressible, but beneath her humor lay a core of loyalty that rivaled anyone in the series. While Lupin recoiled from the thought of burdening her, Tonks refused to accept rejection born from fear. J.K. Rowling shows this with striking clarity in Half-Blood Prince, when Tonks appears pale and diminished, her usual bright hair dulled, her Patronus changed to a wolf. The change reflected her love for Lupin, her heartbreak, and her refusal to let him hide from his feelings. The films gave no space to this quiet battle, and so they robbed viewers of seeing Tonks's love transform from playful flirtation to unwavering resilience. Their marriage became one of the few rays of hope in a world consumed by war. Against all his doubts, Lupin embraced life with Tonks even as Voldemort's shadow grew darker. Yet even then he faltered, haunted by his fear of fatherhood. In Deathly Hallows, he confessed to Harry that Tonks was expecting a child, but instead of joy, he was consumed by panic. He worried that his child would inherit his lycanthropy, that his family would face ridicule. His voice trembled with despair when he admitted, "My kind don't usually breed. It will be like me, I am convinced of it. How can I forgive myself when I knowingly bring a child into the world to be like me?" It was Harry who forced Lupin to confront his cowardice, reminding him that his parents had died for him and that abandoning his own family would be a betrayal of everything James and Lily had stood for. This confrontation ignited a change in Lupin, and he returned to Tonks with renewed strength, finally choosing courage over fear. The birth of Teddy Lupin symbolized renewal amidst ruin. While so many lives were being extinguished by Voldemort's reign, Teddy's arrival was a reminder that love continued to defy darkness. His very existence gave hope. Lupin, in a moment of reconciliation, asked Harry to be Teddy's godfather, a gesture that created a poignant parallel. Just as Sirius had once been entrusted with Harry's care, Harry now bore the symbolic responsibility of protecting. Another child of war. The narrative circled back to the theme of guardianship, the unbreakable bond between generations scarred by conflict. This thread of storytelling is absent in the films, where Teddy is never even mentioned, leaving audiences unaware of how Lupin and Tonks' story echoed Harry's in such a powerful way. Their final moments, as written in the books, were never described in detail. The reader only learns after the Battle of Hogwarts that Lupin and Tonks fell fighting. Yet their deaths were not random casualties. They died as warriors, part of the last stand against Voldemort's army. Rowling's choice not to linger on their deaths but to focus on their absence makes their loss even more haunting. Harry discovers their bodies in the Great Hall, lying side by side, pale. Still were Fred, Remus, and Tonks. That single sentence, so simple yet devastating, delivers the blow. The parallel becomes unmistakable. Just as Harry once saw the bodies of his parents in his imagination, Teddy would one day grow up with only stories of his mother and father. This parallel is one of the most profound yet understated elements of the saga. Teddy Lupin becomes a mirror of Harry. Both children lose their parents to the same war. Both grow up with guardians instead of parents. Yet there is a difference. While Harry's childhood was filled with neglect at the Dursleys, Teddy was raised with love by his grandmother Andromeda and guided by his godfather Harry. Rowling offered a subtle redemption here, as though ensuring that history would not repeat itself in cruelty. But the echo remains. Another child left behind by a battle that never should have needed to claim so many lives. The films, in their rush toward cinematic spectacle, stripped away these layers. The relationship between Lupin and Tonks is barely sketched, their marriage unmentioned, their parenthood invisible. The result is that when the audience sees their bodies on the floor, they feel the weight of another loss, but not the story behind it. Without the knowledge of Lupin's struggles, Tonks's steadfast love, their marriage against all odds, and the birth of Teddy, the loss feels distant rather than intimate. The films present death, but the books reveal sacrifice. The omission leaves a hollow silence where there should have been a crescendo of emotion. Consider the conversation in Deathly Hallows where Lupin, reconciled with fatherhood, beams at the news of Teddy's birth. He tells Harry, "It's a boy, we've named him Ted, after Dora's father." The moment is brief, but it radiates pride, warmth, and the sense of a man finally at peace with himself. To juxtapose that scene with the later image of his lifeless body is to feel the true cruelty of war. The films never let viewers see that joy, and so the tragedy of its erasure is dulled. The audience is left with shadows, while the books give the full contrast of light and darkness. The absence of Lupin and Tonks's arc in the films also diminishes the theme of love as resistance. Rowling consistently used love as the weapon that Voldemort could not understand, from Lily's sacrifice to Harry's own willingness to die for others. Lupin and Tonks embodied this theme. Their love defied stigma, fear, and war. It created life in the form of Teddy, even as death surrounded them. By overlooking this arc, the films lose one of the clearest demonstrations of love's resilience. It was not just Harry who inherited the burden of sacrifice. The next generation also bore its scars. One cannot help but imagine the different impact if the films had devoted even a handful of moments to this story. A quiet scene of Lupin's self-doubt, Tonks's unyielding devotion, the announcement of Teddy's birth, Harry accepting godfatherhood, each would have deepened the emotional resonance of their deaths. Instead of fleeting background casualties, they would have been remembered as heroes whose lives and choices mattered. Their absence in the Great Hall would have been a knife to the heart rather than another tally on the list of war dead. The storytelling rule that Rowling follows here is the power of echo. Stories gain strength when one life reflects another, when history repeats in ways both painful and redemptive. Harry was not the only child shaped by Voldemort's rise. Teddy, though spared the neglect Harry endured, became another reminder of how war reaches into the most intimate corners of life and tears them apart. This echo elevates the tragedy of Lupin and Tonks beyond their individual deaths, turning it into a symbol of the cost of resistance. It tells us that even victories leave behind broken families, and that the true weight of war is carried by the children who grow up in its aftermath. Even beyond the books, Rowling confirmed in interviews that she had chosen Lupin and Tonks to die precisely to mirror James and Lily's fate. She said she wanted another orphan in the story to show that Harry was not alone in his loss and that war is merciless in repeating its cruelties. Knowing this, the omission in the films becomes even starker. What could have been a heartbreaking thread that tied the saga together was instead left in the margins, visible only to readers who lingered on the page. In the end, the tragedy of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks is not just that they died, but that their story was silenced in adaptation. Their arc is one of love, fear, courage, and renewal, woven seamlessly into the themes of the saga. The books give them dignity by showing their struggles and their triumphs, by revealing their love for one another and for their son. The films, in their silence, leave the audience with half a story. And perhaps that is why readers who return to the books find themselves struck by the depth of their sacrifice, understanding that Teddy Lupin's existence carries the echo of Harry's, and that in this echo lies one of the most haunting truths of the wizarding world. Number 18, Dumbledore's Collection. The office of Albus Dumbledore in the films is remembered mainly for its warm golden light, the presence of Fawkes the Phoenix, and the dignified shelves of books and portraits of former headmasters. Yet readers of the novels know that this chamber was far more than a simple workplace. It was a treasury of enigmatic devices, strange magical instruments, and cryptic artifacts that even the most attentive visitor could barely comprehend. J.K. Rowling's description gives the room a sense of living mystery, a place where every object could hold a secret, a past, or even a destiny waiting to unfold. The films, however, stripped this magical sanctuary down to the bare minimum, leaving behind a version that felt too ordinary for a wizard of Dumbledore's magnitude. One of the most vivid images in the book descriptions is that of the delicate silver instruments standing on spindle-legged tables. They puffed smoke, whirred softly, or emitted strange clicking sounds, each one functioning for a purpose beyond the knowledge of the casual observer. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Rowling describes how Harry noticed a number of curious silver instruments, some of them resembling telescopes, and others more like odd mechanical toys, whirring and emitting little puffs of smoke. These details convey not only the eccentricity of Dumbledore's mind, but also his deep engagement with magical research. The films never showed these objects in motion, never allowed them to breathe or whisper their secrets, thereby losing the sense of the headmaster as an inventor. Dumbledore was not simply a collector of ancient curiosities, he was an experimenter. Fans often speculate that some of the objects were his own creations, prototypes of magical tools designed to test boundaries. The silver instrument destroyed by Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad Eye Moody, in Goblet of Fire is one example. When it shattered, Dumbledore sighed with visible regret, noting it had taken him many years to create. This single moment reveals that Dumbledore's office was more laboratory than lounge. He was engaged in crafting devices with purposes too intricate for others to understand. Imagine how the visual language of cinema could have expanded this theme, showing not only a wise elder, but a restless mind constantly probing the mysteries of magic. Among the many hidden treasures of Dumbledore's collection were the silver boxes that produced strange sounds. These were not mere ornaments. They hummed and hissed, at times even letting out sharp musical notes. They seemed to serve as channels of energy or conduits of magical force. In the book Order of the Phoenix, Harry notices one such instrument emitting smoke rings that twist into patterns before fading into nothingness. These patterns may have been designed to test enchantments, detect magical imbalances, or even communicate with faraway locations. Such an object on screen could have offered audiences a glimpse into the uncharted domains of magic, but the films never gave it the attention it deserved. The headmaster's fascination with planetary motion is also suggested in the descriptions. Some instruments resembled miniature orreries, tiny models of celestial systems in motion. They may have been used to predict magical events linked to the movements of stars, an echo of the ancient bond between astronomy and wizardry. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Trelawney's predictions rely heavily on the planets, but Dumbledore's quiet research suggests a more precise, mathematical approach. His miniature planetariums might have helped him track alignments that influenced magical power. Such imagery could have revealed Dumbledore not only as a strategist, but also as a cosmic thinker, someone aware of forces shaping destiny at levels others could not perceive. Another intriguing element often overlooked is the presence of peculiar jewelry and stones within Dumbledore's study. The novels make subtle references to unusual rings, gems, and crystals placed on his tables. While the Deathly Hallows narrative later reveals the true significance of one particular ring, the Gaunt family's relic housing the Resurrection Stone, Dumbledore's fascination with stones appears broader. Magical crystals have long been associated with divination, focus of power, and preservation of memory. The films could have shown the director examining shards that glowed faintly, or stones that pulsed with hidden energy. Their omission deprived viewers of the chance to witness the alchemical side of his persona. It is important to recall that Dumbledore's study was more than a private chamber. It was a setting where pivotal conversations unfolded, where secrets were shared and destinies shaped. Harry's first introduction to the Sorting Hat outside the ceremony took place there, and the sword of Godric Gryffindor gleamed from a glass case. Rowling's careful description suggests that the sword was only one of many relics displayed, hinting that the office was akin to a small museum of wizarding heritage. A close reading of Chamber of Secrets shows Harry's eyes wandering over the glass case in which the Sorting Hat sat and noticing the sword of Godric Gryffindor with its rubies gleaming. These treasures deserved more than a fleeting moment on film. They were symbols of continuity, bridging Hogwarts' past with its uncertain future. The very atmosphere of the office, as written, contributed to its power. The ticking, whirring, and faint hums created a background noise like a living heartbeat. Every object seemed to speak in its own language. When Harry watched the silver instrument collapse in a spray of sparks, the room did not fall silent. It continued to vibrate with life. The books make clear that the office was never still, never simply decorative. It was a place where magic was measured, tested, and sometimes even tamed. The films reduced this dynamic space to a static backdrop, robbing viewers of the chance to feel its pulse. Even the presence of Fawkes, though faithfully represented in the films, could have been enhanced by showing his interaction with these artifacts. The Phoenix was more than a pet, he was a guardian spirit, his life cycle of death and rebirth echoing Dumbledore's lifelong research into mortality and resurrection. How striking it would have been to see Fawkes perched beside a silver device, pulsing with fire-like energy, as if the bird himself fueled the machinery with his eternal flame. This intertwining of creature and creation would have deepened the thematic richness of Dumbledore's world. One cannot overlook the symbolic meaning of Dumbledore's inventions. He was the wizard who pursued knowledge relentlessly, even when it led him into dangerous territory. His instruments were embodiments of curiosity, both noble and perilous. The fact that he created tools whose functions even Harry could not guess illustrates his restless intellect. In a way, these artifacts mirrored Dumbledore's character, beautiful, mysterious, and carrying shadows of past mistakes. The films, by failing to highlight them, missed a crucial chance to depict Dumbledore's complexity. The speculation among fans has grown precisely because of this absence. Some argue that the silver instruments might have been designed to track Horcruxes or to measure the distortions in magic caused by dark objects. Others believe the planetary models hinted at prophecies tied to celestial events, possibly connected to Harry himself. While Rowling never confirms such theories, the richness of her descriptions invites these possibilities. And this is why so many readers regret the simplification of Dumbledore's study in the cinematic adaptation. It erased layers of interpretive potential. The omission also affects our perception of Dumbledore's authority. In the books, his office demonstrated why he was considered the greatest wizard of his age. It was not only his wisdom or his dueling skill, but his ongoing mastery of magical science. His study was proof that he worked tirelessly, experimenting with forces no one else dared to approach. The film's minimalistic portrayal reduced him to a benevolent headmaster in a warm room, overlooking the image of a man surrounded by evidence of genius and obsession. Rowling's own prose leaves no doubt about the otherworldly beauty of the objects. In Order of the Phoenix, she describes how a number of curious silver instruments stood on spindle-leg tables, whirring and emitting little puffs of smoke. That word, curious, is essential. It evokes both wonder and unease, the perfect balance for Dumbledore's character. The audience is meant to be fascinated but also slightly unsettled, aware that this is knowledge bordering on the forbidden. Such tension was missing on screen, and with it the aura of unpredictability that Dumbledore should have exuded. Consider how the visual spectacle could have rivaled even the grandest effects of the films. Imagine the silver boxes glowing faintly in the dark, emitting whispers like forgotten voices. Envision the miniature planetariums casting moving shadows across the portraits of past headmasters, the spinning stars illuminating faces long dead. See the jewels humming softly, their surfaces rippling like water under unseen energy. This is the image the books allow us to build, a gallery of magical marvels designed by a mind always one step ahead of the world. The true tragedy of this omission is not only aesthetic, but narrative. By stripping Dumbledore's chamber of its mystery, the films made it harder to grasp why he, more than anyone else, was prepared to guide Harry against Voldemort. His depth of knowledge, his experimentation with magical frontiers, and his possession of artifacts that could hint at ancient truths, all of these gave him the authority to face the darkness. Without them, viewers see only the mentor figure, not the restless seeker of truth who carried both brilliance and burden. In the end, what the films concealed was not simply a collection of objects, but the soul of a wizard defined as much by curiosity as by compassion. Number 19. The Funeral of Dumbledore. The moment after Dumbledore's death in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince is one of the most poignant in the series, but the film adaptation narrowed this moment into a short visual image. Students lifting their wands in tribute, a wave of light pushing away the dark mark. It is powerful, yes, but it is not the funeral that J.K. Rowling described. The book offered something larger, more intricate, and more heartbreaking. A ritual that showed the weight of Dumbledore's loss, not just for Hogwarts, but for the entire magical world. The absence of this sequence in the movie adaptation left a void, stripping away the sense of grandeur and permanence that Rowling had crafted, in her words. In the novel, Harry sees the preparations for the funeral, a white marble tomb being built down by the lake, shining against the water's edge. This image matters because it stands apart from every other death in the series. Dumbledore was not just buried, he was laid to rest in a structure that would forever mark his place in Hogwarts' landscape. The book makes it clear this was the first time a funeral had ever been held in the grounds of Hogwarts. That detail alone elevates the scene beyond the visual farewell of raised wands. It is not only a tribute, but a rewriting of tradition itself. Hogwarts had never before opened its grounds for such a ceremony, and the weight of that decision reflects how irreplaceable Dumbledore was. The gathering at the funeral turns Hogwarts into a stage for the entire magical community. Rowling describes people arriving from across the wizarding world, creating a moment of unity that was rarely seen in the series. Ministry officials came in their formal robes, witches and wizards from distant places joined the procession, and even non-human beings, giants and merfolk, appeared to pay their respects. Firenze the centaur stood on the edge of the forest, arrows lowered as a sign of mourning. Hagrid carried Dumbledore's body in his arms. This was not just about students mourning their headmaster, it was the magical world acknowledging the death of a leader who transcended boundaries. The Merpeople's presence was one of the most haunting images. From beneath the lake, they raised a song, eerie and unearthly, their voices carrying over the water. Rowling describes it as a great, keening lament that echoed through the air, a sound unlike anything the students had ever heard. This moment emphasized that Dumbledore had a bond with beings that many wizards either feared or ignored. He was a man who reached beyond his own kind, who bridged worlds. The film ignored this, leaving viewers with a much narrower impression of his influence. Equally striking were the giants. Dumbledore's compassion had extended even to them, despite the fear and mistrust they often inspired. In the book, a number of centaurs were standing like sentinels, and two enormous and grim-looking giants appeared in the distance, their massive forms looming against the landscape. This detail matters because it underscores the idea that Dumbledore alone could inspire loyalty and respect from such varied beings. His funeral was the one place where enemies and outsiders stood together, if only for a moment, and the omission of this from the film flattened his legacy into a simple farewell instead of a world-shaking event. The student's grief was also more layered in the novel than in the film. Harry sits with Ron, Hermione and Ginny, watching the crowd, feeling the strange mixture of numbness and anguish that comes with such a loss. Rowling writes, "He had never known so much pain before." This was not the swelling music and collective wand-raising of the movie. It was raw, uneven, difficult. Harry struggles to focus on the words being spoken, and he notices the silence of the crowd, the stillness of nature, as though the world itself was holding its breath. That stillness is what gives the funeral its weight, an entire community stopping to acknowledge a man's passing. Professor McGonagall's presence is crucial as well. In the aftermath of Dumbledore's death, she assumes leadership, but the funeral shows her vulnerability. She sits stiffly, tears in her eyes, forcing herself to remain composed. This detail reveals the depth of her respect and love for Dumbledore, but also her immense responsibility in the wake of his loss. The book allows the reader to feel the shifting of power, the sense that a new chapter is beginning, one without the guiding hand of the wizard who had been the cornerstone of the fight against Voldemort. The moment of the tomb's sealing is perhaps the most symbolic gesture in the entire sequence. After Hagrid lays Dumbledore's body to rest, white flames erupted around the body, consuming it, and when they vanished, a white marble tomb stood there, encasing Dumbledore's body and the clothes in which he had been buried. The imagery is striking: fire, purification, transformation into marble. It is not just burial, it is transfiguration, a fitting end for a wizard whose life was defined by the balance of wisdom, power, and mystery. The movie never offered this closure, and without it, the grandeur of Dumbledore's farewell was lost. The book also gave us tiny details that made the scene personal. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, sings his lament, filling the grounds with a music that seems to pierce the soul. Harry feels the song as a direct reflection of his own grief, something words cannot capture. It was the sound of despair, Rowling writes. That single element of the funeral connects the magical and the emotional, the mythical and the human. In the absence of Fawkes's song in the film, audiences missed the most intimate sign of Dumbledore's passing, the voice of his companion vanishing into the distance. Rowling also included an important narrative choice. The funeral is where Harry makes the decision not to return to Hogwarts for his final year. Surrounded by grief, watching the people who depended on Dumbledore gather, Harry realizes the enormity of the battle ahead. He tells Ron and Hermione later that he must finish the task Dumbledore set for him, to find and destroy the Horcruxes. The funeral is not just a conclusion, it is a launching point, a moment that propels the story forward. The movie, by condensing the funeral into a visual farewell, stripped away this transition, making Harry's decision seem abrupt rather than born from the gravity of the moment. The international presence at the funeral also deserves attention. Wizards from abroad appeared, showing that Dumbledore's reputation extended beyond Britain. He was not just a headmaster, but a figure of global importance. Rowling gives glimpses of foreign witches and wizards in richly coloured robes, their expressions solemn, their heads bowed. It is an image that reinforces the idea that Voldemort's war was not confined to Britain alone, and that Dumbledore's influence and loss would be felt far beyond the castle walls. The movie gave us none of this scope, reducing the moment to a local tribute. The political undertones of the funeral are worth noting. The Ministry's representatives arrived, attempting to present themselves as allies in grief, yet their presence felt hollow in light of their past opposition to Dumbledore. Rowling's description captures the hypocrisy of officials who had spent years undermining him, now desperate to align themselves with his legacy. The subtle tension of that scene reminds the reader that even at a funeral, politics could not be escaped. This nuance was lost in the adaptation, which presented grief as universal and uncomplicated. There is also the way nature itself seemed to join in the mourning. Rowling writes of the lake shining like a great sheet of glass, of the centaurs standing silently among the trees, of the hot summer air, heavy with stillness. It is as though the environment bends itself to the grief of the moment, a literary technique that amplifies the solemnity. The movie, in contrast, relied on music and lighting to convey mood, losing the intimate connection between place and feeling that the book so carefully constructed. What makes the funeral unforgettable in the book is how it reflects Dumbledore's life. Every group present, the students, the professors, the magical creatures, the international guests, the political officials, represents a part of his vast influence. He was not simply a headmaster, he was a figure who touched every corner of the magical world. The ceremony, with its fire, marble, phoenix song, and haunting silence, was a reflection of the man himself, wise, mysterious, and unifying. To leave this out of the film was to shrink the scope of his legacy, reducing the depth of what his death truly meant. The absence of Dumbledore's funeral in the movie remains one of the most significant omissions in the adaptation. While the raised wand's scene is memorable, it cannot compare to the breadth of the funeral described in the book. Rowling gave us a vision of loss on a scale rarely seen in fantasy literature, a community, a world, and even nature itself grieving together. The film offered only a glimpse of what should have been the most solemn, unifying event in the story. In doing so, it softened the impact of Dumbledore's death, robbing audiences of the full weight of the farewell that Rowling intended. Number 20, Draco Malfoy's past. Draco Malfoy entered the story as a symbol of arrogance, a boy with slicked back hair, and a sneer always ready for Harry Potter. The films sharpened this image into something almost caricatured, letting him play the role of the schoolyard antagonist without dwelling too deeply on what lay beneath the surface. Yet in the books, J.K. Rowling offered something far more complex. Draco was not merely a villain in training, but the heir to a family burdened by allegiance, trapped in webs spun long before he was born. His world was defined not by choice, but by legacy. The contrast between what we see in the films and what is written in the novels is stark, and nowhere is this clearer than in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, where Voldemort forces Draco into a deadly mission that reveals the true tragedy of his character. In the sixth book, Voldemort's decision to assign Draco the task of killing Albus Dumbledore was never about trusting the boy. It was punishment, a cruel reminder to Lucius Malfoy that failure would be repaid with pain and that his family would never escape the Dark Lord's grip. Lucius had been disgraced after the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries in Order of the Phoenix, where he was captured and imprisoned in Azkaban. Voldemort, who viewed weakness as unforgivable, used Draco as a pawn. This was not about giving him power, but about ensuring the Malfoys lived under a shadow of fear. When Voldemort handed the boy this task, it was not empowerment but a death sentence, wrapped in false honor. The films portray Draco's mission as a subplot, with quick glances of him fiddling with the vanishing cabinet and a tense encounter in the astronomy tower. But the books plunge into his thoughts, his shaking hands, his paranoia. Rowling makes us see the boy beneath the mask of cruelty. He patrols the corridors not with confidence, but with dread, shrinking under the weight of expectation. He is not plotting for glory, but scrambling for survival. When he stands in the bathroom, wand drawn against Harry, the reader sees the unraveling of a teenager crushed by an impossible demand, his attempt to use the Cruciatus. Curse in Half-Blood Prince reads less as malice than desperation. A telling moment comes when Harry confronts Draco in the bathroom and uses Sectum Sempra, a curse he barely understands. In the film, this is just another duel gone wrong, blood spilling across tiles. But in the book, the scene is layered with consequence. Draco is described as staring at Harry with wide, terrified eyes, bleeding profusely, his humanity laid bare. He is no longer the untouchable prince of Slytherin, but a boy, broken open, vulnerable and close to death. The terror in his gaze is not only about his wounds, but the stark reminder that he is in far deeper than he ever imagined. Harry sees for the first time the cracks in his rival's armor, and the reader cannot help but feel the same. Rowling's narrative makes clear that Draco never wanted to be in this position. He spends much of the sixth book avoiding his friends, closing off his world, isolating himself from the safety of school banter. In one passage, he cries alone in the bathroom, his face buried in his hands, an image so raw and human that it lingers long after the page is turned. This is not the Draco Malfoy of the films, posturing and hurling insults across the Quidditch pitch. This is a young man choking under the impossible choice between killing a man he knows to be good or watching his mother and father suffer unimaginable consequences. It is a portrait of tragedy disguised as arrogance. Narcissa Malfoy's role deepens this tragedy further. Desperate to save her son, she turns to Severus Snape, begging him in Spinner's End to protect Draco. The chapter reveals the sheer terror of a mother who knows her child is being used as a pawn in a cruel game. "He lives only because I begged him to spare my son," Narcissa tells Snape. Her fear underscores what the films gloss over, that Draco's mission is not one of ambition, but of survival, with his entire family's lives hanging in the balance. The bond between Narcissa and her son becomes central, revealing that beneath the Malfoys' obsession with blood purity lies something more universal, a mother's desperation to save her child. The vanishing cabinet, the centerpiece of Draco's plan, becomes a symbol of his entrapment. He spends the year obsessively working to repair it, not because he wants glory, but because failure means death. In the films, these scenes are rushed, offering flashes of Draco in corridors or staring at the cabinet with furrowed brows. But in the novel, the cabinet is described with a haunting inevitability, each attempt at repair reflecting his descent further into isolation. His classmates gossip about his absence, but Draco withdraws further, too burdened by the weight of his mission to care about appearances. The cabinet becomes both his salvation and his prison, a device that, if fixed, will seal his fate as much as it opens the door for Death Eaters. When the moment finally arrives in the astronomy tower, the book provides a devastating portrait of Draco's humanity. He lowers his wand, sweat trickling down his face, hands shaking. "I don't want to do it," he admits to Dumbledore. This is the defining moment of his character, one that separates the boy from the image painted in the films. He is not a killer, he is a frightened child. Rowling allows Dumbledore to speak to him with empathy, recognizing that Draco is a victim, not a monster. The tension is unbearable because the reader sees how close Draco is to crumbling entirely. His hesitation is not weakness, but a refusal to surrender fully to darkness. In that hesitation lies the proof that Draco Malfoy was never Voldemort's true servant. The films, constrained by time, reduced this moment to seconds. Tom Felton delivers a powerful performance, his eyes wet with fear, but the depth of Draco's turmoil is lost in the rush to the climax. The novel gives us pages of standoff, words heavy with meaning, Dumbledore's calm understanding set against Draco's shaking will. In one of the most heartbreaking lines, Draco blurts, "He'll kill me! He'll kill my whole family!" The words tear away the facade of superiority, exposing the trembling boy beneath the robes. This is the Draco the books reveal, a character consumed by fear, forced into choices no child should ever face. Rowling does not absolve Draco, nor does she redeem him into heroism. Instead, she places him in the murky grey space of moral conflict. His sneers and insults earlier in the series are not erased, but they are reframed. We begin to see them as shields, defenses built to hide the insecurity of a boy raised in a house of dangerous loyalty. Draco's bullying is real, his cruelty often sharp, yet by the 6th book, the reader sees how thin that armor really is. The Voldemort task breaks through it, exposing not a villain, but a prisoner of circumstance. The shift continues into Deathly Hallows, where Draco is further diminished. Captured at Malfoy Manor, Harry sees a Draco unwilling to identify him with certainty. The hesitation once again speaks volumes. Though surrounded by Death Eaters, Draco cannot bring himself to condemn Harry directly, whispering that he is unsure. This moment echoes the Astronomy Tower, where hesitation saves him from becoming a murderer. Again, he refuses to fully align with Voldemort, his choices shaped not by courage but by an instinctive refusal to commit to darkness entirely. It is a quiet act, often overlooked, but it cements Draco's place as a character torn apart by conflict rather than consumed by ambition. One of the most telling contrasts between the books and films lies in the aftermath of the Battle of Hogwarts. In the films, Draco retreats silently into the arms of his parents, disappearing into the crowd, his story seemingly concluded, but Rowling offers a different note in the epilogue. When Harry sees Draco on platform 9 3/4, they share a moment of acknowledgement. Draco is described as slightly balder, with his features sharper, standing with his wife and son. There is no friendship, no warm reconciliation, but there is no enmity either. It is the quiet recognition of two men who shared youth under extraordinary circumstances, each forced into paths they never truly chose. The tragedy of Draco Malfoy lies in his humanity, overshadowed by the mask he was forced to wear. The films, while memorable, strip him of the layers Rowling gave him. He becomes the sneering schoolyard bully, useful for tension, but lacking the tortured complexity that defines him in the novels. To see him fully, one must return to the books, to the trembling boy crying in a bathroom, to the teenager whispering his fear to Dumbledore, to the young man hesitating in the face of absolute evil. Draco was never Voldemort's heir, nor was he ever Harry's true enemy. He was something far more real, a boy trapped in a story written long before he was old enough to choose his part. In this way, Draco becomes one of Rowling's most compelling creations, precisely because his story is incomplete, unresolved, filled with contradictions. His arrogance is real, but so is his fear. His cruelty is undeniable, but so is his unwillingness to kill. He is a character defined by the tension between who he was raised to be and who he is underneath. And while the films may have overlooked this depth, the books preserve it, offering readers the haunting truth of a boy who might have been anyone if only the world had given him the chance. Number 21. The Story of Morsmord. Of all the curses woven into the tapestry of Voldemort's reign, few carry the same chilling weight as Morsmordre. In the Harry Potter films, the spell is only fleetingly shown, a brief flash in the sky during the Quidditch World Cup, an eerie skull with a serpent tongue shimmering in emerald green. But in J.K. Rowling's books, the spell and its result, the Dark Mark, hold an entirely different power. It is not just a frightening emblem, it is the visible reminder of terror, death, and domination. The Dark Mark was the calling card of Voldemort's followers left above the homes of the dead. Its sudden appearance was enough to send whole communities into silence, neighbors locking doors, and children hiding under blankets. In those moments, the magical world felt the breath of death at its throat. The films diminish this power. When the Death Eaters summon the mark in the Goblet of Fire, it feels more like a sinister fireworks display than the dreaded omen it truly was. In the book, however, Rowling spares no words in describing the horror that the mark inspired. She writes, "It was the sign of Lord Voldemort. It was a symbol of terror. Whenever the mark appeared in the sky, it meant that Death Eaters had killed." These words are not poetic exaggeration. They are the blunt statement of how much the mark meant to ordinary witches and wizards. For a family who saw that glowing skull over a neighbor's house, it was not just a warning, it was a promise that Voldemort's shadow stretched closer. Consider the scene after the Quidditch World Cup in the novel. The crowd of witches and wizards, already traumatized by the Death Eaters' rampage, turns hysterical when they see the dark mark. Rowling paints the scene in vivid detail. Screams erupted in the field. People were running as fast as they could toward the woods. The crowd seemed to have become a mass stampede. Even seasoned ministry officials like Arthur Weasley react with visible dread. The mark does not appear as a casual threat. It evokes history, years of whispered rumors, and countless massacres. The skull in the sky was the herald of murder, and yet in the film, that terror evaporates, replaced with a single brief moment of spectacle. The Dark Mark also held significance in how it dehumanized Voldemort's enemies. Each appearance transformed the victim into nothing more than an example, a name added to a tally. Families who stumbled upon the mark hovering over their own roofs would feel death closing in. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Professor Slughorn admits the visceral dread it inspired, recalling, "The dark mark was a terrible sign. You didn't dare go outside when you saw it." This testimony from someone who lived through Voldemort's first reign of terror is invaluable. It reveals that the mark was not simply conjured at random, but wielded with a cold purpose, a message etched across the sky. Voldemort has been here, and no one can stop him. When we examine the history of Mors Morda, its very nature as a spell makes it unique. Unlike the unforgivable curses, which strike directly at the victim, this spell targets the community. Its cruelty lies not in immediate suffering, but in psychological devastation. Imagine being a parent, tucking children into bed and glancing out the window to see the emerald skull glowing above your neighbor's chimney. You would not need to ask what happened inside. You would already know. Rowling captures this subtle horror again in the Goblet of Fire. When Arthur Weasley explains the reaction of wizards, people panicked. It's just a mark, but to them it means death. The films strip away this carefully built tension, leaving audiences unaware of why the mark mattered so much. Harry himself understands this symbolism deeply by the time he reaches his 6th year at Hogwarts. After Dumbledore and he discover the body of a Muggle family murdered by Death Eaters, Harry sees the skull blazing above the house. Rowling describes his gut reaction. Harry's insides turned over. The dark mark was shining in the sky. This is not the reaction of someone witnessing a common spell. It is the physical shock of someone who knows that death lingers just yards away. That moment, absent in the films, reminds us that the dark mark was Voldemort's most effective propaganda. Terror was not whispered, it was shouted from the heavens. The spell also illuminates the cruelty of Voldemort's inner circle. Bellatrix Lestrange, for instance, relished in casting it. When the dark mark appeared, it was not just a ritual, it was her triumphant cry to the world. Likewise, Lucius Malfoy, though later pretending reluctance, was no stranger to the practice. These were not empty gestures from faceless wizards in masks. They were deliberate acts by people who knew that terror was a weapon stronger than the killing curse. The skull in the sky ensured that Voldemort's presence lingered long after the physical violence had ended. What makes this omission in the films particularly striking is how much the books stress the continuity of fear. Even after Voldemort's first defeat, the mere mention of the dark mark evoked dread. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Cornelius Fudge alludes to the horrors of Voldemort's reign. making it clear that the sight of the skull once meant entire towns could collapse into panic. The mark lived in memory long after the war, much like a scar on the collective consciousness of the wizarding world. By not exploring this fully, the films reduced the Death Eaters to a mob in masks, robbing them of the psychological power that Rowling so carefully built. One cannot overlook the role of the spell in shaping Harry's own journey. For him, the Dark Mark becomes not just a reminder of Voldemort's cruelty, but a challenge. Every time he sees it, Harry remembers that his parents lived under this same shadow. The skull in the sky becomes an echo of the night his mother and father died, though no mark was left above Godric's Hollow. This absence, too, is telling. Voldemort considered their deaths so routine that he did not need to proclaim them. Yet the imagery of the mark ties Harry to every other victim of the war, a silent reminder that his story is part of a larger tapestry of terror. The contrast between Harry's reaction and that of other characters is also revealing. Ministry officials treated the mark as evidence, Aurors like Mad-Eye Moody saw it as a call to arms, and common wizards trembled at its sight. Each perspective reveals a different layer of the mark's meaning. In Order of the Phoenix, when Death Eaters murder Amelia Bones, neighbours later recall the glow of green above her home. It was not an abstract fear. It was the grim announcement of her death. These details are absent from the films, and the omission lessens the gravity of Voldemort's power. It is also important to understand why Rowling gave this spell such prominence in her narrative. Voldemort thrived on fear. Terror was his oxygen. A single act of violence could ripple outward, magnified 100 times by the sight of the Dark Mark. It was not enough for him to kill. He wanted the living to suffer through dread. The green skull did not vanish quickly. It hovered, staining the night sky, ensuring that fear lingered long after the Death Eaters had disappeared into the darkness. The mark was Voldemort's way of whispering into every home, "You are not safe." One of the most tragic examples comes in Half-Blood Prince, when Bill Weasley explains that the Dark Mark had been used to lure victims. The skull was sometimes placed above an empty house, and when curious neighbours rushed in to help, they were ambushed by Death Eaters. It was a trap, both psychological and physical. This detail underlines how the mark was not merely symbolic, but a weapon in itself, capable of manipulating entire communities into vulnerability. No film scene captures this insidious cruelty. Even after Voldemort's downfall, the mark remains etched into memory. The fear it conjured cannot be erased. Characters like Slughorn, Fudge, and even Snape carry the weight of what it meant. Snape, in particular, bears both the brand on his arm and the memories of conjuring it in the sky. His double life is haunted by this dual burden, and Rowling ensures the reader never forgets it. When Dumbledore looks at Snape's arm in silence, he is not just acknowledging a brand of allegiance, but a lifetime connected to the horrors of Mors Morda. This is why, when Harry finally sees Voldemort defeated, the Dark Mark fades with him. Its power dies only when the man himself vanishes. The spell, which once seemed eternal, vanishes into history, a ghostly reminder of how symbols can wield more power than swords or wands. In the films, the Dark Mark lingers as an interesting visual motif. In the books, it is something else entirely, a character in its own right, a living emblem of dread, etched into the sky and into memory. It is this distinction that separates the mask of Voldemort's reign from the reality of it. To speak of Mors Morda is to understand that magic in Rowling's world is not always about duels or explosions. Sometimes it is about silence, about the way a green glow over a house could empty a village of laughter. The spell was not feared because of its beauty, nor because of its complexity. It was feared because it carried a single, merciless truth. Someone has died, and Voldemort has won again. This truth, hammered into the hearts of every witch and wizard, is the legacy of Mors Morda. Number 22, The Fate of Cho Chang. Harry Potter fans often remember Cho Chang as the girl of Harry's awkward first kiss, a fleeting figure whose significance seems to vanish as quickly as she appears on screen. Yet in the original books by J.K. Rowling, Cho is written as something far more layered than a brief teenage crush. She is a character whose life is defined by grief, by the cruel hand of war, and by the ways in which young people stumble through loss. The films reduced her to comic relief, a pretty face who blushes and hesitates, but the novels tell the story of a teenager attempting to navigate unbearable tragedy. Her presence is not merely about romance, but about how trauma lingers, how it shapes choices, and how even Hogwarts could not shield its students from the cost of Voldemort's return. When Cedric Diggory is murdered in the graveyard at the end of the Triwizard Tournament, the books allow Cho's devastation to bleed into the next volume. She is not simply sad, she is broken in ways only someone who has seen love stolen violently could be. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes that Cho often had a look of quiet misery about her whenever she appeared in the halls of Hogwarts. The films give us none of this. Instead of a young woman swallowed by grief, they portray her as the smiling girl Harry longs to date. This erasure of her mourning flattens the emotional texture of the story, stripping away the painful truth that teenagers in Rowling's world are asked to carry burdens far heavier than crushes and exams. Cho's grief defines her interactions with Harry in the book, and it also explains the fragile foundation of their relationship. She is attracted to Harry, yes, but she is also drawn to the one person who shared Cedric's last moments. Her connection to Harry is soaked in tragedy. It is not the spark of carefree romance, but the attempt of a grieving heart to find solace in someone who understands the depth of her loss. The film adaptation never captures this nuance. Instead, their brief romance is reduced to giggles in Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, when in truth the book paints that scene as painfully tense. Cho cries during their date, bringing up Cedric again and again, while Harry, overwhelmed and uncomfortable, cannot give her the comfort she seeks. Rowling writes that Harry felt utterly miserable as Cho's tears fell, his own confusion rising as he realized he could not compete with a ghost. The heartbreak of their relationship comes from this imbalance. Cho wants Harry to speak about Cedric, to honor his memory, but Harry, still reeling from the trauma of witnessing Voldemort's rebirth, cannot bear to relive it. Their silences grow heavier, and the cracks between them widen. This is not comedic teenage awkwardness. It is the tragedy of two wounded souls colliding but failing to heal each other. In the books, Harry reflects that dating Cho felt like going out with someone who seemed to be crying all the time, a cruel thought born not out of malice but out of his immaturity and inability to process grief alongside someone else's. The films omit this, leaving audiences with the illusion of a clumsy first kiss, when in fact the story is about how trauma makes people strangers, even to those they want to love. The betrayal Cho is accused of in Order of the Phoenix is another moment the films distort. In the novel, Cho confides in her friend Marietta Edgecombe, who then exposes Dumbledore's army to Dolores Umbridge. Cho defends her friend, insisting that Marietta was pressured, but the damage is done. Harry sees Cho's loyalty as weakness, and the trust between them shatters. This moment is not about teenage jealousy, it is about the impossible choices war demands of young people. Cho's defense of Marietta reveals her humanity. She does not view the world in sharp lines of loyalty and betrayal the way Harry does. She sees her friend as a frightened girl who made a mistake, not a traitor to be cast aside. The film, however, simplifies this plot to the point of absurdity, implying that Cho herself exposed Dumbledore's army under the effects of Veritaserum. By doing so, the adaptation transforms her from a nuanced character into a one-dimensional obstacle to Harry's story. Rowling's decision to write Cho as a complex figure dealing with loss reveals the larger theme of adolescence in wartime. Hogwarts, once a place of wonder, becomes a backdrop where students must process violence and political upheaval. Cho embodies the truth that not every young person emerges stronger from tragedy. Some become consumed by it, some falter, and some make mistakes that fracture friendships. Her arc underscores how unfair it is to expect children to bear the weight of war. Where the films saw only a minor romance subplot, the books used Cho to explore the psychological consequences of Cedric's death and Voldemort's return. Harry's failure to understand Cho is also central to his own growth. In the books, his time with her teaches him painful lessons about empathy. He wants a girlfriend who will distract him from the darkness, but instead he encounters someone who demands he face it with her. He cannot. Their breakup is not just a teenage quarrel, but part of Harry's larger journey toward emotional maturity. When Ginny Weasley later becomes his partner, their relationship succeeds partly because Harry has already learned, through his missteps with Cho, how destructive silence and avoidance can be. In this way, Cho becomes the necessary heartbreak that shapes the hero, though her own pain remains unhealed. Consider how Rowling frames Cho's confrontation with Hermione during a heated conversation in Order of the Phoenix. Hermione points out that Cho is torn between two loyalties, to Harry and to her friend Marietta. The scene is messy, emotional, and real, the kind of conflict teenagers embroiled in rebellion would face. Hermione, ever logical, cannot accept Cho's defense of betrayal, while Harry, burning with his own sense of justice, cannot forgive it. But Cho's position is a reminder that life is not black and white, especially under tyranny. Friendships bend under pressure and loyalties blur. The film brushes this away, leaving no trace of the emotional storm rolling. Crafted on the page. Another important layer is the cultural dimension Rowling quietly embeds in Cho's character. She is one of the few non-white students at Hogwarts, a Ravenclaw known for her intelligence and grace on the Quidditch pitch. By flattening her role in the films, the adaptation not only diminishes her story, but also erases an opportunity to show diversity in meaningful ways. Instead of portraying a young Asian witch whose grief and loyalty add depth to the narrative, the films present a caricature of teenage romance, robbing her of the weight she carries in the books. The power of Cho's story is in the silence between her and Harry, in the tears she cannot stop, and in the shadow Cedric's memory casts over every interaction. Rowling captures this poignantly when Harry notices her crying after Quidditch practice, her eyes red, her voice trembling as she tries to hide her pain. This image is seared into the reader's mind, a girl still in love with someone buried in the cold ground, trying to smile at another boy who cannot compete with a ghost. The films never allow this vulnerability to breathe. By doing so, they deprive Harry's journey of one of its most bittersweet lessons. Cho's arc also connects to the broader theme of memory that runs through the series. Just as Harry is haunted by the deaths of his parents, Cho is haunted by Cedric. The two of them, united by loss, are mirrors to each other, but they cannot bear to look for long. Their brief relationship demonstrates that shared trauma does not always bind people. Sometimes it fractures them further. This painful truth is lost when the films replace heartbreak with awkward comedy. In the end, Cho Chang represents the collateral damage of war. She is not the chosen one, nor the sidekick, nor the comic relief. She is the reminder that war takes its toll on everyone, even those who stand at the margins of the grand narrative. Her grief, her mistakes, and her failed relationship with Harry are not tangents to the story, but threads woven into the tapestry of growing up under the shadow of Voldemort. By cutting her down to a minor role, the films stripped away one of the most humanizing aspects of Rowling's tale, that ordinary teenagers, too, suffer deeply when darkness rises. The tragedy of Cho Chang's adaptation is that audiences who only know the films are left with the image of a one-dimensional crush, when in fact she embodies a devastating portrait of youth in wartime. She is a girl who loved, who lost, who tried to move forward, and who stumbled under the weight of grief. Her story may not be glamorous, but it is real, and it lingers in the pages for those willing to see beyond the awkward kiss. Through Cho, Rowling shows us that the world of Harry Potter was never just about spells and adventures, but about the fragile hearts of teenagers trying to survive the storm. Number 23, The Invisible Knight of Gryffindor. The halls of Hogwarts were never quiet, even in the dead of night. The castle breathed with its own peculiar rhythm, alive with shifting staircases, muttering suits of armor, and portraits that never seemed content to remain still. Among these countless canvases, one stood out for its unyielding energy, a portrait that became both nuisance and entertainment for generations of students, the knight in armor who could never resist the urge to duel. J.K. Rowling's books present him as Sir Cadogan, an eccentric but oddly endearing figure who embodied both the humor and unpredictability of Hogwarts. Yet in the films, this curious character was erased, his absence leaving a curious silence in the corridors where once his challenges had rung out like clanging swords. When Harry Potter and his friends first encountered the knight in Harry Potter and the prisoner of Azkaban, they were confronted not with menace but with chaos wrapped in shining armor. The small knight, barely reaching the frame's edge, would leap about the canvas on his plump pony, bellowing for combat. Rowling's words painted the portrait vividly. Sir Cadogan, the knight in a suit of armor, galloped into the picture, brandishing his sword and shouting, "Charge!" The humor of such a scene was inescapable, particularly because Harry, Ron and Hermione were often too tired or too worried about larger problems to indulge him. His insistence on honor and bravery, even when no one asked for it, offered a comic relief that balanced the darker themes growing steadily in the series. The knight's love for duels, however, was more than a running gag. It illustrated the castle's depth, a reminder that Hogwarts was not just a school, but a living organism stitched together by magic and memory. Each portrait had its own quirks, but Sir Cadogan stood out because his antics directly interfered with student life. At one point, when the fat lady's portrait was slashed by Sirius Black, it was Sir Cadogan who temporarily replaced her as guardian of Gryffindor Tower. Rowling describes the scene with a touch of irony. Nobody was very happy about this. Sir Cadogan's habits of rushing into headlong battle and inviting duels at all hours made him a very unsatisfactory guardian. Imagine the daily inconvenience of returning to one's dormitory only to be forced into a dramatic performance of knighthood. Students groaned, but readers laughed, recognizing that Hogwarts thrived on such absurdity. The films, however, chose efficiency over atmosphere. Viewers never saw the knight's comic gallops, his pompous speeches, or his ridiculous challenges. This omission stripped away a layer of Hogwarts eccentricity, one that fans of the books often mourn. Without him, the Gryffindor common room's temporary chaos during the third year was reduced to a mere change in guardian, absent of the raucous humor that Rowling built into her narrative. For readers, Sir Cadogan was not only comic relief, but a living symbol of Gryffindor values exaggerated to the point of parody. He believed so wholeheartedly in courage and combat that he became a caricature, a mirror in which young Gryffindors could see both their bravery and their follies. The detail becomes more fascinating when we recall the context of the prisoner of Azkaban. At this point in the story, the castle was shrouded in tension. Dementors prowled the grounds, Sirius Black was believed to be a murderer hunting Harry, and the students lived in a state of fear. Into this grim backdrop burst the ridiculous image of a knight charging into imaginary battles with his tiny horse. It was a masterstroke of tonal balance. Rowling knew when to relieve her readers with laughter, just as she knew when to heighten their dread. Sir Cadogan's antics reminded us that the magic world was never one-dimensional. Its lightness made its darkness all the more palpable. Harry's own encounters with the knight reveal subtle layers of his character. Though often exasperated, Harry rarely mocked the portrait outright. He tolerated the absurdity, much like he tolerated Peeves, the poltergeist, or nearly headless Nick's lamentations. Rowling subtly showed us Harry's patience with the bizarre, an important trait for a boy destined to face riddles and horrors beyond comprehension. For example, when Sir Cadogan issued one of his endless challenges, Rowling writes, "Harry tried to sidestep him, but Sir Cadogan blocked his way with a flourish. 'Draw, you knave! Stand and fight!' Harry's sigh, his refusal to engage, and his weary tolerance spoke louder than any duel could. It revealed his ability to coexist with chaos, a lesson he would need when dealing with far greater foes. Ron and Hermione's responses further amplified the humour. Ron, with his short temper and knack for sarcastic remarks, often muttered insults under his breath about the portrait's lunacy, while Hermione attempted to reason with the knight as though logic might tame him. Their contrasting reactions gave readers the joy of seeing the trio's personalities refracted through even the smallest of characters. In one particularly comic moment, Sir Cadogan suggested 50 new passwords a day, exhausting the Gryffindor students, who could barely keep track of them. The absurdity of needing to remember phrases like scurvy cur or oddsbodikins highlighted the burdens of magical life in a way no dark threat could.